I'm John Lentz, Senior Editor at City and State, and joining me today is Tammy Gamerman, a Senior Research Associate at the Citizens Budget Commission. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, and thank you for having me.
Now, obviously last week, Governor Andrew Cuomo rolled out his big State of the State agenda. There are a number of big infrastructure projects. In fact, a proposed $100 billion in infrastructure. There have been some questions about how that will actually be funded. There are also some questions about what that means for New York City. But let's start out with the first point. From your view, I know you've been combing through some of the documents. Do we know how this will actually be funded, and what do we know so far?
So the reality is most of these projects will not be funded through the state budget. So the state budget itself did not provide many details on how these projects will actually get done. Some of the projects will be completed by other authorities. So some of them will go through the Port Authority, Thruway Authority, the MTA. So if these projects do move forward, we will see them in those budgets. But I think what the governor is doing is he's putting out an ambitious plan. He wants to start a conversation about what projects we should be investing in, and we'll figure out the financing details later. So a very small percentage of that $100 billion actually is in the state budget. So what you see in the state budget is additional money for roads and bridges in upstate New York, which goes through the state's Department of Transportation. And
that's the $22 billion that he allocated for upstate New York?
Right. So it's $22 billion over 5 years. It's a slight increase from the previous 5-year plan, and part of it will be funded through settlements with the banks.
Is there any concern, however, that he's calling for all this spending but hasn't yet identified where the money will come from?
Yes, so there has to be some process of prioritizing which projects move forward. But I think this is supposed to be the start of that conversation. So, will all of these projects happen? No. Maybe a couple will. The governor has had success in moving the new Tappan Zee Bridge forward. So I think he's just trying to start up conversations. But, as we get further down the road, there has to be real conversations about how do you pay for these things, and what are our needs, and which projects should we be prioritizing over others.
Mm-hmm. I know your organization has paid attention to the goal of keeping spending growth at 2% year to year. What do all these projects mean for that goal, in your view?
Well, so because most of these projects have not been fully funded yet, there isn't much impact yet on the state's goal of keeping spending to 2% growth. So, the governor has been very successful in controlling spending in the state. Before he took office, the budget would grow by 5 or 6% a year, sometimes more. And he's largely done this by keeping the largest pieces of the budget, Medicaid and school aid, to about 3 or 4% growth. And he's been holding agency budgets flat for the past 6 years. But one of the things that was surprising in the budget this year was that another way that the state gets to that 2% spending cap is by engaging in some cost shifts to New York City. So the governor is proposing that New York City start paying more for CUNY's senior colleges and paying more for the Medicaid program. So these two actions are cost shifts. They are not actual spending reductions, and they would cause a big gap in New York City's financial plan.
Right, and it's obviously caused a big controversy, and the mayor's expressed his unhappiness about these proposals. Do you think they make sense? Is it starting a conversation, you think, that's going in the right direction, or is it really a bad move by the governor?
So in regard to the CUNY proposal, I think it's reasonable to have a conversation about how much the city should be contributing. Right now, the city is doing well financially, and it's a big beneficiary of the CUNY system. So it's reasonable to start to talk about it. And the governor seems like he's moving in that direction, also talking about how can we find efficiencies and spending, and think more big picture. However, in regard to the Medicaid proposal, this really moves us in the wrong direction. So over the past decade, the state had been assuming more of the cost of the Medicaid program, and this was in recognition of the fact that New York has a highly unique and highly inequitable way of paying for Medicaid. No other state comes close to requiring the same level of contribution from its local governments. Medicaid is largely a program that provides services to poor individuals. So that means if you require local governments to contribute, you're placing a higher burden on those that have higher shares of low-income individuals.
Tammy and Gamerman, thank you.
Sure, thank you.